10 War Crimes of the U.S. Civil War. What happened in the American Civil War is never talked about. Here are 10 of the most disgusting examples. 10. Bee Creek Massacre. Silas Gordon's pro-slavery, anti-union activities resulted in the Union burning down every town and farm in Platte County, Missouri twice. He appears to have been consumed by an intemperate fury against the North, and more than once killed people on mere suspicion, without any evidence of wrongdoing. He was probably responsible for the Platte Bridge tragedy, in which a rail trestle was burned through, collapsing under the weight of a passenger train, killing at least 17 men, women, and children. In retaliation for his guerrilla tactics, Colonel James Morgan burned down Platte City and apprehended 3 of Gordon's men, William Kuykendall, Black Triplet, and Gabriel Chase. Kuykendall had played dumb through all of this and his ruse worked. He was spared. 9. Champ Ferguson at Saltville. Ferguson was a Confederate guerrilla possessed of the same raging hatred of the Union as Silas Gordon, and led various posses of armed Confederate sympathizers, and sometimes soldiers, in ambushes and murderous raids throughout Middle and Eastern Tennessee. He is notorious for acting with marked cruelty in targeting anyone, even women and children, whom he felt crossed him or supported the North. She and her men occupied a Union field hospital and shot and stabbed to death more than 24 soldiers of the 5th U.S. Color Cavalry Regiment, including white officers. 8. Savannah Campaign. It is dated from November 15 in the aftermath of General John Bell Hood's accidental razing of much of Atlanta, Georgia to December 21, 1864. Hood's intent was to burn military supplies lest they fall into General William Sherman's hands, but most of the city was made of wood and the winds were high. Sherman ordered his army of 62,000 with 64 cannons to march 300 miles southeast from Atlanta to Savannah, Georgia, destroying everything in their path, especially the railroads. Nevertheless, Sherman knew that civilian deaths would be unavoidable and explained himself in a speech after the war with the statement, "War is hell." Uncorroborated reports exist of a massacre of 200 civilians north of Columbia, South Carolina a few months before the march commenced, so Sherman knew full well what his men would do whenever no responsible eyes watched them. Sherman personally saw his men rape and murder unyielding slaves throughout the march and gave no order to stop this. It is estimated that 50,000 civilians were killed during the war, and possibly 1,000 civilians died at the hands of soldiers who illegally entered their homes to loot during Operation Savannah. 7. Shelton Laurel Massacre. In January of 1863, at the height of the war, Lieutenant Colonel James Keith was dispatched with the 64th North Carolina Regiment to the town of Marshall, in Madison County, on the border with Tennessee. A posse of pro-Union civilians had broken into the home of Colonel Lawrence Allen, looted and destroyed much of it, then broke into a storehouse for salt and stolen what they could carry, then blew it up with gunpowder kegs. Keith was enraged and, with the 64th, he searched the Shelton Laurel Valley, found and fought with them, shot down 12, and captured about 7. Keith deliberately disobeyed the order of the North Carolina governor, Zebulon Vance, to hold the prisoners until they could be tried, and had them all executed by firing squad and thrown in a ditch. Keith was given 2 years in prison for this before escaping. He was never seen again. 6. Sacking of Osceola, Missouri. Few places throughout the United States saw quite the anarchic bloodshed as the Kansas Territory. Senator James Lane led a raid on Osceola on September 23, 1863, in pursuit of General Sterling Price's invading army, east of Harrisonville and Clinton, Missouri, near the present border with Kansas. Lane was a staunch abolitionist, Price just as staunchly pro-slavery. Lane had about 1,100 men at his disposal and skirmished with a much smaller Union detachment outside Osceola. He then ordered 9 men of military age, one of them 16 years old and sobbing over his dead horse, to be tried on suspicion of aiding the Confederacy, and had them shot dead. 5. Centralia Massacre. At around 9 a.m. on September 27, 1864, William "Bloody Bill" Anderson, a force of 80 guerrillas, departed for Missouri. They stopped a train and looted it and its 125 passengers, including 23 Union soldiers. Anderson ordered the train to be evacuated. 23 soldiers lined up to strip and then asked which of them were officers. Only one man stepped forward, but instead of killing him, Anderson's men shot 22 others, then scalped, skinned and dismembered. That said, Sergeant Thomas Goodman arrived in town with 155 Union mounted infantry, heard Anderson's action and attacked him from behind. Anderson's men were armed with up to 4 pistols, most stolen over the years, and routed the infantry within 3 minutes of engaging them. Anderson survived to be killed in a battle in October of that year. 4. Battle of Fort Pillow. Fort Pillow was a Union fort on the coast of Tennessee and was besieged on April 12, 1864 by 2,500 cavalry under the command of General Nathan Bedford Forrest. Forrest demanded that the castle be surrendered. The commander refused, and Forrest's men attacked and defeated them. Both sides of the war reported that after the surrender and disarming of the fort's surviving garrison, mostly black soldiers and civilian workers, the Confederates swarmed and bayoneted them. He stabbed as many as 250 men and killed them with a stick in a realm of sadism. More than 24 people were castrated and lynched. 3. Lawrence Massacre. In retaliation for No. 6, Captain William Clark Quantrill led a raid into Lawrence, Kansas on August 21, 1863. Lawrence was a hotbed of anti-slavery sentiment, and Quantrill was a fervent pro-slavery Confederate guerrilla, who had effectively enlisted into the army under General Sterling Price, but deserted to form his own band of soldiers. There was little law in the Kansas Territory, and Quantrill's raiders are known for more than one infraction of it. The raiders descended from Mount Oread into town at about 5 o'clock in the morning and burned down every business and municipal building. Homes were spared torching, but the families were driven outside, and the husbands, fathers, and sons all shot dead on their porches, in the streets, even in their beds. The women were raped, some of them, and some children shot down or trampled while they fled. At least 185 men and boys as young as 11 were executed merely for being able-bodied. 2. Camp Douglas. Douglas was the northern counterpart to the next entry, a prison of war camp in Chicago, Illinois for Confederate soldiers. It was built as a training depot for Union recruits, but by March 1862 was refitted as a prison for the large numbers of captured rebels. It operated in this capacity until the end of the war. Within the first month its use as a prison resulted in the death of 1 in 8 inmates from exposure to the harsh winter or pneumonia. The prisoners were poorly cared for in the way of medicine and proper diet. They received enough to eat to save them from starvation, but did not receive much fruit or onions, which allowed disease to suppress their immune systems. By the war's end, the camp had gone through no less than 15 commands of 12 different wardens, none of whom was able to run the facility efficiently. Not only were the prisoners grossly neglected, they were not even properly supervised, and there were over 100 successful escapes. From June 1864 to the end of the war, inmates caught breaking any rule were tortured on the wooden horse, a sharply edged, wood pyramidal beam that rested between the buttocks against the tailbone. Prisoners were forced to sit on it with weights tied to their ankles for hours, even in snow or rain, until they passed out and fell off. From 1864 on, the inmates were no longer fed adequately but given only enough to keep them alive and hungry. Purely for the guards' amusement, they were forced to stand at attention in freezing rain and sleep for hours, during which time the guards robbed them of any valuables. The death toll by the war's end has been put at 4,454, but many went unreported, and the total figure may be as high as 6,000, most from exposure and disease brought on by malnutrition. This is at least 17% of the 26,000 prisoners sent to Douglas. 1. Camp Sumter. Camp Sumter was a Confederate prisoner of war camp for Union soldiers, today a historic site located in Andersonville, Georgia, from which the prison derives its more well-known name. Its conditions were little known from its opening in February 1864 until it was liberated in May 1865, 1 month after Lincoln was assassinated. When the mistreatment of prisoners came to light, the entire nation and even Europe were disgusted and dumbfounded by the photographs of horrifically emaciated prisoners who somehow found the strength to survive. The prison covered 25 acres east of Andersonville, and the outer fence was a 620 by 779-foot log fence with 2 entrances on the west wall leading into town. Anyone who tried to cross it for the outer fence, or even touched it, was shot without warning. Inside the camp were only 8 small buildings that could house a total of about 100 people. The prison held 45,000 at the end of the war. 13,000 of these men died of heatstroke, starvation or disease within 7 months of their summer imprisonment. The entire prison population suffered from a hookworm epidemic, causing many to have bloody diarrhea filled with worms. Food and medical supplies were scarcely supplied to the prison, and an hour later he toured the camp and caught a severe case of the flu and fends off with oranges. He then asked the commander, Henry Wirz, why Wirz did not suffer from scurvy, which was common throughout the camp. Wirz said he ate apples and oranges. And the prisoners, he asked. Wirz shrugged and said, what about them, said. Prisoners could pull out their own teeth with their fingers due to a lack of vitamin C, 3,000 per month or 100 per day died. They had no clean drinking water, but they had to drink from the same stream that ran through the center of the camp, where they bathed and collected about half of all liquid and solid waste. Wirz was tried, court-martialed, and hanged for murder on November 10, 1865, the only Confederate officer executed this way.